Hello there, everyone, and welcome to another Lever Live event. We are streaming right now on Zoom for all of our subscribers and free subscribers who've decided to join us. And we're also streaming on our YouTube channel, our Lever News YouTube channel, so you can check us out there. Today, we're going to be discussing the state of Trump's appointments, announced for his next administration. And we're bringing on a special guest, Jeff Hauser, the executive director of the Revolving Door Project. And what we're going to be looking at specifically is dissecting the conflicts of interest plaguing Donald Trump's cabinet picks. We've been hearing so much about all the different cabinet picks, but we really want to drill down on not whether these are people of upstanding moral character. That's sort of a different topic, but explore how the conflicts of interests with billionaires, with private interests, and other groups will affect how these appointments are made and shape government policies and all of that. That's what we like to focus on here at The Lever. So thank you again for joining us. We have a bunch of our reporters in-house. I'll introduce them in a second, and want to let you know that we are taking questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. So as we continue on with some of these different topics, go ahead and drop some questions in. We're going to try to get to all of them. The last time we did this, the day after the election, we had so many questions, we couldn't get to all of them, but we're going to be trying to do better about that this time around and integrate our audience into the conversation. So we know that lots of people have lots to say. So let's go around and introduce who we have on deck here. So we have Katya Schwenk, one of the reporters here at The Lever. How you doing there, Katya?
I'm good, Jared. Thanks. I'm excited for this.
Oh yeah, we've been waiting all of Thanksgiving to come back and dive into this. We also have Lucy Dean Stockton, our news editor at The Lever. Hey, Lucy.
Hi, hey. Similarly, was hoping to just dive right back in on Monday after the holiday.
Exactly. And Freddy Brewster, reporter here at The Lever. Freddy, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Excited for this event. Yeah, looking forward to it.
And we have our special guest, Jeff Hauser, the executive director of the Revolving Door Project. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So before we get into the whole slate of topics we have and all the different cabinet nominees that we're going to try to analyze and dissect their particular conflicts of interest, I wanted to share that this weekend when I saw the news headline that Joe Biden had pardoned Hunter Biden, my first thought wasn't necessarily how odd that was or whether or not that was a good or bad thing, but it was Joe Biden is still president. It kind of slipped my mind there for a second that we actually do have someone else in the presidency at the moment, and it's not Donald Trump with his slate of news headline grabbing appointees that just every single one that comes out, it's a new spot of Googling, figuring out who these people are, where they came from, because a lot of these folks, as we all know, are very much outside the normal Washington establishment, and they bring a whole different level of conflicts of interests, of where their particular backgrounds, and we'll create some different ways of trying to think about how these appointees and the process of how these different nominees will get through the Senate, and whether or not some of the ethics rules, some of the norms around how people are chosen and picked actually work and operate. But Jeff, I want to bring it back to you first. First of all, give us just a quick introduction of what is the Revolving Door Project, and then I want to see if you can share with us about how Trump's first term, where we were in Trump's first term at this time, and how maybe this time around things seem to be operating differently or not. But what is the Revolving Door Project?
Sure. Revolving Door Project is sort of like the lever in that we focus on the more subtle ways that corporate America pollutes our politics. I think the fact that our legislative process in this country is broken is relatively well known. That doesn't mean we have fixed all of those problems, but I think how a bill becomes a law, how lobbyists pollute that process, at least corporate lobbyists pollute that process, that is relatively well understood. The fact that the executive branch exists to take laws that have been passed and decide whether or not to implement them, that is actually much less well understood by most of civil society and most ordinary Americans. There just isn't as much coverage on the decisions that the Environmental Protection Agency makes on whether or not to enforce the Clean Air Act stringently or not. And then there's very little focus on whether or not the Justice Department's Environment and Natural Resources Division will send someone to jail for polluting the water. So we get into the weeds on the executive branch, on corporate influence. And then we also dabble in some of the corporate influence within the economic media. And we've begun to dabble in some state government work as well, because obviously corporate America is quite well aware that the state capitals exert a lot of influence on American life as well. So we try to go where corporate America knows to go and where the traditional progressive movement has been weaker.
And of course, there are different kinds of rules and regulations about ethics, transparency that are on the books legislatively and other rules. And the Revolving Door Project is also examining, are people following a lot of those rules?
Absolutely. I mean, so America's ethics system, such as it is, really owes a lot to the decade of the 1970s. There was broad spread revulsion at the crimes of Richard Nixon, and there was a bipartisan consensus that we need to do better. So a campaign finance reform system was put in place. Our lobbying regulations were put in place. But the way rules work, it's not entirely distinct from having a young child. You put in place certain rules, and over time they start realizing that there are some exceptions, and then the exceptions ultimately swallow the rules. And that's what's happened. Like, you know, parents don't really have a filibuster to overcome, although, I mean, maybe sometimes, but for the most part, like, we can try to update our rules, but that really hasn't happened as much in terms of the federal government. We haven't really updated ethics rules to reflect the more sophisticated corporate influence strategies. And so, like, right now, if you register as a corporate lobbyist as opposed to just wielding influence in American politics on corporations' behalf without lobbying, you're probably less important. Like, the really powerful people don't structure their professional lives so that they do not need to register as a lobbyist. And so if you say, hey, let's put a ban on corporate lobbyists, like, lots of people do stuff that an ordinary person would look at their work in a week and be like, yep, that person's a lobbyist. And nope, they're technically not a lobbyist. So we issue recommendations on how to do better. And
Yep.
you know, those recommendations work better actually, even in the first Trump administration than I think they're going to in the second Trump administration. Like, one, I never quite got to answering your question about what's different. I think during the first Trump administration, there was pressure on Trump to try to be somewhat ethical. I think it's been a little bit forgotten, but he actually ran for president the first time as a relatively incorruptible force. He said, look, I am incredibly rich. I will run a self-financing campaign. It was a lie.
And a lot of people who voted for him said just that. He's already a billionaire. He's already wealthy. He won't be in the pocket of anybody.
Right. And so he made a lot of commitments on how he was going to drain the swamp. His final closing ads in the 2016 campaign attacked a swath of Wall Street CEOs. So it's, you know, very surprising to people when he appointed a bunch of Goldman Sachs figures throughout his administration. And in fact, people who ran focus groups were saying they're having difficulty getting people to believe them when they were running focus groups and saying, look, Trump's appointed a bunch of people from Goldman Sachs, and people were like refused to buy it because that really was not how he ran. And so he made certain commitments on how he was going to maintain a distance from the Trump organization. And obviously, he should have had to sell off the Trump organization. He obviously did not cut off ties to the organization run by his ne'er-do-well children. Like, I'm not in any way defending the ethics record of the first Trump administration. It was appalling, but it was appalling within the bounds of somebody who was not intentionally mocking the notion of there being ethics rules. So even if you are going to break rules, if you acknowledge they exist and they apply to you, you're going to be somewhat circumscribed in your corruption. I think they've spent the last 4 years out of office figuring out what they can do, how they can make more money, and also understanding that their argument against Biden and then Harris was going to be about economic effectiveness. And they could largely, therefore, ditch the claim of being incorruptible. And they could just focus on, I know how to get stuff done. And I think they feel really unmoored from the rules that should exist for sure, the rules that do exist. And they have a handy get out of jail free card from the Supreme Court in their back pocket. So I think we saw a lot of corruption. I think, you have to go back
and
to
in
the days of
2016,
Harding.
just to jump back there, because I think what was interesting about these last few months is I had actually forgotten about all the things that happened during the first Trump transition period, right? Because everyone was still in shock. Everything felt so new. There was protests out in the streets. And the things that he did at least make motions toward two specific rules was one about putting his holdings in a blind trust, and then also an ethics pledge that I've been hearing a lot about, or at least their refusal so far, begrudging way in which they're not signing this ethics pledge this time. But Jeff, real quickly before we bring in everybody else, what did he do on those two points?
Sure.
Back
So
in 2016.
He agreed to abide by the ethics restrictions during the transition. And so, as you said, like, Joe Biden actually is president right now. And constitutionally, Donald Trump is nothing. Like, there's no such thing as ex-president or a future president under the Constitution. That's not a thing. But we have set up a system to allow a transition, so somebody who is going to become president can start getting the briefings and start placing their people across the executive branch so they can find out information. So they're not like taking over from scratch on January 20th. And it's a system that has bipartisan support, makes a lot of sense. But in order to get that access, you're supposed to agree to some ethical limitations so you don't use that access for more than 2 months for your personal enrichment. And Trump has refused to do that. And then because our ethics laws are kind of comically Swiss cheese full of holes, presidents for the last few presidents have all issued ethics obligations where they make their staff sign on to commitments to be ethical, to not revolve out immediately, that go above and beyond legal obligations. And we have no reason to think that Trump is going to make his team do that this time. That was above and beyond the legal minimum, and it's something that Trump did in January of 2017. And as of now, we don't know if he's going to do it.
And on that note, let's go ahead and jump into some of these nominees. We've been hearing a lot about some of the more shocking ones: JFK Jr., Dr. Oz, Tulsi Gabbard. But we wanted to at least highlight some specific ones. First of all, Pam Bondi, the nominee for Attorney General, replacing Matt Gaetz, who got bounced because of all of his problems. But Pam Bondi, can one of you go ahead and remind us, who is Pam Bondi? And let's get into some of the ethical concerns that we've been digging up about Pam. Freddie, can you give us a rundown?
Yeah,
Who is
yeah,
Pam?
of course. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. She's the former Florida State Attorney General. She's also a former lobbyist for the private prison industry. She worked as a lobbyist for the Geo Group, in particular. She also lobbied for some tech companies like Uber and Amazon, and did some work with General Motors, amongst like a variety of other companies as well. She's been a longtime Trump ally. during her time as a Florida Attorney General. She declined to investigate Trump University for its variety of alleged scams and frauds after receiving a $25,000 campaign donation from Trump. So, she's a really interesting character. She's been around in the Trump orbit for a while. She was she helped do some defense counseling for Trump's first impeachment hearing. But what's a little bit more shocking is a story that David Sirota and I dug up, and that's her brother was Tesla and Elon Musk's lawyer for a security fraud lawsuit in 2018. And I just think this highlights like these issues that Jeff has pointed out, like this revolving door that not only extends to the people directly that are going to be in administrations, but their family members, and what that says about how they'll decide to pilot the agency they're going to be in charge of.
And Freddie, I just want to highlight that article that you and David Sirota wrote last week, because this was kind of a breaking story that the Lever brought up, but it was Pam Bondi. And tell us, how is she then connected to Elon Musk, who was, Donald Trump's one of his biggest financial backers, and is having such an intimate relationship with this new administration?
Yeah. So her brother, Bradley Bondi, is a lawyer at Cahill and something. I forget, the name escapes me off the top of my head, but he's been like a white, white collar lawyer for a while now. And so, that's the relationship between those two, are brother and sister.
Yep.
And what was the second part of your question?
And then how is that then connected to Elon Musk?
Yeah. Brad Bondi, he worked for Tesla and Elon Musk during their 2018 securities fraud lawsuit. And that was the one that kind of stemmed from Elon making like a series of tweets about, Tesla's stock, about potentially taking it private, and other issues.
And then why is that unusual? Because, just because they're brother and sister doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything nefarious going on, or a lot of people run in similar circles. Why would that bring up any concern?
Yeah, I think it brings up concern just given her actions, previously as Florida Attorney General, when she, declined to investigate Trump at Trump University after a campaign donation, and could point to, potentially favoritism on who she decides to investigate as the the United States Attorney General.
Okay, should we move on to
Actually, yeah, if I could just jump in too.
Lucy, please.
I think it is especially important to be looking at where Elon Musk's companies come in. He has billions of dollars in government contracts already, and he stands to benefit both in his new advisory position, running the Department of Government Efficiency. He stands to benefit by reallocating money to his company's public funds, or potentially by influencing the course of the many different trials he's in with the government right now. His companies are obviously awarded billions in contracts. I think last year they had over 100 different government contracts with everyone from the Department of Defense to NASA to Department of Transportation, Tesla, obviously, but also SpaceX is other big company. But they also have been investigated for labor violations. They're in hot water with OSHA. They also have been, investigated by other places, for other agencies for their finances. So as much as he is standing to benefit from the public funds that he will get, maybe through his influence in this new administration, he also stands to benefit by quietly closing the other sorts of regulatory and consequential punishment type interactions he's had with the
Jeff,
government.
since we're on the topic of Elon Musk, I think you're a good person to ask about this, because there's conflicts of interest, and then there's Elon Musk and how he's emerged in this new administration. Can we even call that I mean, it's something bigger. We need a different word than just conflict of interest, don't we? Tell us what at the Revolving Door Project you guys are looking at, and what do we even make of this? What is
I
happening
mean,
with Elon?
there's a cliche that people always throw out the analogy of blank on steroids, but I think steroids is itself inadequate to describe how much worse this Musk situation is than run-of-the-mill corruption. And everything that Lucy mentioned is deeply concerning, but I want to add one set of concerns that I have about Musk that I think has gotten less attention, which is artificial intelligence and how he is and is not currently financially tied to artificial intelligence is a little bit opaque. He often will claim that various companies of his are going to enter into the space. He originally was an investor in OpenAI, but there have been falling outs. But DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, the not actually a department mechanism to cut regulations and fire civil servants, I very much fear there's going to be an effort to replace civil servants with artificial intelligence. So hypothetically, if you want to cut people who work at the Social Security Administration and essentially do service via chatbot, like I'm not encouraged by that. I really think the idea of determining the eligibility for Social Security and doing customer service for people with disabilities or elderly people via chatbot is an incredibly stupid idea. But I suspect we will be hearing it soon. And I suspect that if we do hear it, Musk will figure out a way to funnel money to his friends and allies in Silicon Valley to do so.
And of course, it's not just that someone like Elon Musk is a proponent of artificial intelligence and using it to gain efficiency. It's that he's deeply invested in artificial intelligence companies, and with him there doesn't seem to be any reason why they wouldn't steer government dollars directly toward his own companies and benefit himself. We have a comment or a question in the chat from Jim Rezer saying this whole Doge thing is really scary. Non-elected officials with no accountability are in charge. Do any changes need to be approved by Congress? These are all questions that we need to think about now, because so much of the relationship that is being built up here hasn't been seen before.
Yeah, I mean, so the trend in the modern presidency, going back many decades, a bipartisan trend, has been toward greater centralization of authority. The National Economic Council was only created under Bill Clinton. It didn't exist before that. The growing power of the National Security Council, that's a post-World War II phenomenon. So what does that mean? That means the State Department has lost relative influence. That means the Treasury Department has lost influence, and the orbit of advisors in the White House and most closely associated with the president have gained influence. And so while Musk has not taken a formal job in the White House, to the extent to which it is said that you in the White House listen to Musk can exert enormous influence through his influence over the White House personnel, and can do so without the Senate advice and consent process in terms of his confirmation. He doesn't have to sell any of his properties. He evades many of the conflict of interest rules. And this has been a concern for Revolving Door Project for a long time, use of special government employees, which technically I think Musk won't even be, but that you can hire people on a part-time basis and they have fewer ethical obligations than if they're a full-time employee. So if you give somebody on part-time work a lot of responsibility, that's an end run on the ethics laws. Well, this Doge is possibly, again, like taking that pre-existing problem and multiplying it with a number that ends with a lot of zeros. It's a very bad situation.
Well, let's move on to another nominee for the Department of Transportation. This is Sean Duffy. This actually isn't one that I've followed that closely. So Katya or Lucy can tell us, who is Sean Duffy, and the nominee for the Department of Transportation?
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, Sean Duffy is really such a good example of like the deference that Trump has shown to industry with a lot of these cabinet picks. Duffy is not really someone who is known even to the right on transportation policy. Before his appointment, I think a lot of people, and me included, who don't know the name, like might have known him from being a Fox Business host, being, back in the day, a reality TV star before he launched a political career. He served in the House of Representatives as a congressman from Wisconsin for a time. But when Lucy and I started digging into Sean Duffy's background, when this sort of obscure media figure was appointed to lead the Department of Transportation, which of course oversees these really important issues of policy on aviation and highways and even oil and gas to a certain extent. When we started looking into Duffy's background, we found that in fact he had worked as a lobbyist. After he became a congressman, after his career in the House, he went on to go, on the other side of things, work as a lobbyist, as the Revolving Door Project knows, this is a really common occurrence. And so during his time as a lobbyist in Washington, worked as a lobbyist for the airlines, worked as a lobbyist for an oil and gas pipeline company. And, something Bill McGee, an expert on these issues, told me was, his most prominent experience on transportation was when he was working for the airlines. And so I really think that Duffy as a pick raises concerns about deregulation, raises concerns about whether he's going to hold airlines accountable, something he's, criticized Pete Buttigieg, current DOT secretary, for doing. But it really is just emblematic of, how these cabinet picks are really coming often from the industries they're about to oversee.
And that the industries are not quiet. I mean, I think the day that he was picked, Airlines for America, which is the top lobbying group, sorry, industry representative group, said that they were thrilled with his nomination. I mean, there really is, I think, an increasingly, or should I say, a vanishingly thin line between industry and government. And I think we've seen it in this election with just the huge amount of billionaire influence, but I think we also see it day to day with industry being so blatantly involved in rulemaking and in getting people elected. And now, of course, in celebrating the nominations in this next cabinet.
Let's pick another one out of the hat. We have Scott Bessent for Treasury. He's among Trump's biggest allies on Wall Street, and to be the head of the Treasury is a big deal. Freddie, who is Scott Bessent?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about Scott Bessent is that he was a former longtime Soros fund manager. And Soros gave him $2 billion to start his own hedge fund. And Scott Bessent really just kind of represents some of the like insider Wall Street type of people that Trump is selecting to be in his cabinet. Bessett's been around for a long time, and he's a kind of an interesting pick that a lot of people on the right didn't really see coming. Jeff, do you know much about Scott Bessent?
He is not actually like one of the very most successful hedge funders. Not that I would ever pay obeisance to somebody for getting rich as a hedge funder, but interestingly, there's like an argument he's not very good at it, or at least hasn't been on his own. Like he assisted Soros at a time when Soros made a lot of money. But apparently there was some Oppo research being shared between different factions of the Republican Party and Wall Street for their preferred choice. And you can make Bessent's performance look poor. Now, like, that's not really the best way to oppose him, but I think he is shockingly inexperienced. Like, he is not even one of those Wall Street figures like a Jamie Dimon who is so government adjacent that even if they lack government experience, they are intimately familiar with the processes of government, or at least many of the processes. So we don't think you should ever have your first job in government be at the level of Secretary of Treasury. No one would ever say your first job on Wall Street should be running a hedge fund. So why do we think it should go in the other way? So we'd be opposed. But even amongst random Wall Street people who could join the government, this guy's kind of an empty suit. I think, like, if you want to think like Trump, he's a 6'5" guy who's rich and still has a lot of most of his hair. And I think that might go pretty far in describing it. Like, I don't know. Like, interestingly, he is gay and married, and that is not seeming to be a thing, which I guess is definitely a positive direction for this country. But that's the other probably like most notable demographic fact.
Do you think it's like a being bipartisan like kind of pick?
I I still remain a little bit bewildered despite having had a bunch of conversations with people, including like people who are more connected to lobbyists. I don't fully understand it, but I do think there is a sense that the Treasury Secretary needs to be a spokesperson about the value of the dollar in particular. And so Bessent's corner of hedge funding is macro trades and sort of following currency. And the most famous trade he worked on with Soros was when Soros took on the Bank of England. So I think it is the fact that Bessent is the person who can talk about the value of the dollar and understand exactly how his words will be heard on Wall Street. Now, I don't think that is the primary job of the Treasury Secretary, but there are a universe of people who think that's really important. I think that is a lot of why Bessent was picked. And again, he looks good on TV.
Well, and another figure who looks good on TV with no government experience at all is Pete Hegseth to be the Secretary of Defense. That's gotten a lot of attention. Freddie, give us a rundown on who Pete is and the concerns that people have about him taking the helm of the Department of Defense.
Yeah, Pete Hegseth is a Fox News personality. Before that, he kind of headed up some of these like weird nonprofits. For example, he was the head of it's called the Concerned Veterans for America, and from 2013 to 2026, or excuse me, 2016. And he's another one of these types of people where, like, kind of like you pointed out, he looks good on TV, he's well spoken, but people don't really know quite like what his background is going to be when it comes to Department of Defense. And like Matt Gaetz is facing just a slew of pretty serious, allegations, everything from, sexual assault stemming from an event in California to there was a recent story in the New Yorker by Jane Meyer that she highlighted how Hegseth was forced to resign from the Concerned Veterans nonprofit over reports of financial mismanagement, sexual impropriety, and repeated incidents where Hegseth was drunk on the job. So that's another rather, I think it's a pick that Trump largely saw that this guy looks good on TV, and he's a, dogged Trump supporter, and that's how he got stuck in there. I've seen reports from some more like right-leaning personalities who they were kind of like interested. They didn't really know quite what to make of this selection, and I think they were also kind of like wondering like how is this going to play out?
So let's go through a few more before we jump into the bigger question about ethics, rules, and regulations in general. Katya, Lucy, do you have any favorites from the grab bag that you'd like to pick out from some of these new nominees? We have Brooke Rollins for agriculture, Lori Chavez DeRemer for labor, Doug Burgum for the Department of the Interior, former governor of North Dakota. There's so many.
There are so many. I mean, there's Chris Wright, the new Secretary of Energy, who said a few years ago, actually, the Lever reported at an event he was at, he said that there, quote, there is no climate crisis. So of course that one is
and where is Wright
immediately
from?
Concerning.
He's
from the great state of Colorado.
And he's the CEO of a fracking company, Liberty
That's right.
Energy.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there are some that are kind of surprising, Mehmet Oz, who is trying to dismantle the entire Medicare system and transition basically the nation's retirees from the public Medicare system, which is the only really functional public healthcare system that we have and would be the blueprint for if we were ever to create a Medicare for all or universal healthcare system in this country. They're trying to dismantle that program and transition people onto Medicare Advantage. These plans, which routinely deny people care, which are dropped all the time by doctors' networks for refusing to reimburse, and which have overbilled the government to the tune of billions of dollars, though those investigations are ongoing. I think something that's come up again and again in the chat is RFK Jr. He's kind of a grab bag. He's a real wild card. I will say that, like, having researched food policy, worked on many farms and in food settings before, I am extremely skeptical that anything benefiting small farmers or health initiatives that truly make people healthier or contribute to public health in a meaningful way will come out of the Trump administration. But I am, I'm not opposed. I'm not immediately gonna say that it's not. I think that there could be things that come out of the administration that will be surprise. And I'm not sure if it's all going to be a corporate take for all.
Yep.
But I am really skeptical.
Well, and that's one of the intriguing things about some of these picks is that since some of them don't come out of the traditional Republican establishment, lobbyist industry world, you do get someone like RFK Jr. who, since he doesn't have those connections, might push through policies that a lot of people might widely agree with because it's actually going against certain industries because of their beliefs or because they think it's popular, or someone like RFK genuinely might believe it. And that's, I guess, one of the things that we have to keep an eye on. Not everything is bad that these people will do, right?
For sure. And I think it is important, actually. I'll get personal. This was a big conversation at Thanksgiving dinner, was that the incoming Trump administration will be very, very bad. But I think it's important to realize that things are also kind of bad right now. I think, looking at RDP's, like the work coming out of the Revolving Door Project, is like there is already tons of conflicts of interest, like with the Democrats too. And I think it doesn't mean that we have to like write off everything. RFK, of course, is like very critical of things like forever chemicals, but the EPA is already quite critical of forever chemicals. It's like there are good things happening and there could be positive things happening. But I think our job is to continue to follow the money and these conflicts of interest, just as we do in this administration and we'll hope to do in the next.
Yeah. And Jeff, give us a sense of that from your perspective too, because are there some things that you're looking at where you actually see opportunities where some of these nominees show that they are going to be taking on industry in ways that even the Democrats wouldn't?
Well, I mean, like on the RFK Jr. and food question, I'd bring up Brooke Rollins at the Department of Agriculture, who is an extremely normcore Republican in the worst possible senses of the term. And then look at Russell Vogt, who came up in the chat at the Office of Management and Budget, who I think Russell Vogt is one of the key architects of the entire administration. He was the creator of the Schedule F concept in the first Trump administration at the very end, that they should fire every senior civil servant, at least have the option to fire all civil servants, claiming that they are political figures and policymakers, even if they're technically, that's not true. And so Russell Vogt as head of the Office of Management and Budget, oversees OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which has a very obscure name, but a very powerful role. They look at every regulatory change. And that's positive regulations, that's negative regulations, that's deregulation, as well as new regulation. And I'm a little skeptical of kind of like what RFK Jr. can get done via control of the FDA on food in a world in which he is buffeted on the one side by Russell Vogt and on the other side by Brooke Rollins. And so, I mean, like the Lori Chavez DeRemer at Labor, I mean, I was with a senior labor official, like maybe roughly the night before she was picked, and they were expressing extreme skepticism. So like on its face, definitely like encouraging. But what I will be looking at there is who gets the wage and hour division job, who gets the occupational safety and health administration, OSHA position underneath Chavez DeRemer, because your secretary doesn't really run anything. They are kind of like the public face, which is part of why you like put all these telegenic experienced communicators in charge. But then it's the people one or two layers down who actually run the day in and day out responsibilities. And so I think it's really important to monitor who get these jobs underneath people, even when they're more encouraging. Obviously, that can go the other way also, that you could see somebody better. But that's where I think Russell Vogt's really important, because if I am an evil capitalist and I am like contemplating what do I make of the slight heterodox nature of the Trump administration, where I'm largely happy, but I have some concerns about people. Vogt at the Office of Management and Budget is kind of like my backstop, my last line of defense, because of his power over both regulatory initiatives as well as negotiating the budget with Capitol Hill. And so I think like the Office of Management and Budget, it can wield more or less power and be more or less visible. But if I were like to try to think about like what's the most important job in government that people don't normally think about, OMB might be number one.
Yeah, and those are the, some of the administrative roles deep in the government that I think we're all going to be focusing a lot more attention on. And so let's move into our last topic for this live event, which is if you're a group or individuals who cares about corruption in government, cares about good governance, and just wants government to work well, where do we go from here? And namely, how do we still hold people accountable during the Trump administration? Because one thing that seems to be a characteristic of all the people that we've named across all of them, some of them are very different, but there's just this feeling of shamelessness, of not caring about the rules. And in fact, just a sense that rules around things like transparency or not having conflict, it's almost like a quaint dismissal of them, if not outright hostility to them. And in a world like that, how can it be that we bring up the rules or point out these conflicts of interest and actually make an impact if they don't care about it? And if the public seemingly doesn't seem to care, at least the ones that voted for them, where does that leave us? Do we just throw up our hands and just go for the ride? Jeff, help us out here. What do we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the background fact that explains a lot of American politics right now is that people are extremely cynical about institutions, and they're extremely cynical about institutions for very good reason. And we need to engage with that as a background fact. And they might view things like rules and processes as sort of irrelevant, unnecessary, superfluous, or part of the problem in the first place. It's all too heavily lawyered. And so we cannot rely only on saying something is illegal, something is corrupt.
You broke the rules. You didn't fill out this paperwork.
it's not hall monitor work on the anti-corruption front, but it's to go one step further. It is to constantly explain why somebody's corruption could be connected to a downstream real life thing that happens. So, when there's the train derailment in East Palestine, you follow the money, you figure out why it was that trains were able to behave recklessly, and you talk about fixing it. And then you look at the fact that like Sherrod Brown really tried to fix it, and JD Vance for a while did, and then got, disciplined by the powers that be, and the whole process went nowhere. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens, like in East Palestine, like, Sean Duffy having Boeing planes drop out of the sky, like happened when Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's wife, was the transportation secretary under Donald Trump. And Democrats did almost no oversight when the Boeing planes started dropping out of the air in 2018 and 2019. We called on them to do so. And it was a huge mistake, because if you just focus on the outrageous things that Trump says, the cultural symbols, the abhorrent words he uses, words that like are genuinely harmful. I'm not defending or even diminishing them, but we have to acknowledge that lots of people don't think it matters, thinks he's only saying the things that other people are thinking but are more couth and don't say. And we got to go deeper. We have to tie real life stuff back to the corruption. If your home insurance prices are going nuts, we have to tie that to the climate crisis and talk about how when you have all these nominees and people running the government who don't believe in climate change or are kind of celebrating more emissions, like they're responsible for this. Like there has to be a connection between the stuff that happens in real life and the violations of our ethics laws. If we just assume that people think violating the rules is bad in and of itself, we're not going to get anywhere. That's resistance 1.0. Resistance 2.0 has to be, this stuff is not normal and it matters. We cannot just assume that normalcy is so attractive to people that the violation of it is going to turn people off.
Yeah, because normalcy right now is not attractive to people. I mean, I think that's been the most clear. And if I hear what you're saying, it's about reminding people why some of these rules, why these processes existed in the first place. A lot of which, when it comes to corruption, some of the ones that we're talking about were put in place post Watergate, when the people looked around and saw how the lack of transparency, the conflicts of interest, affected how the government was actually run at a deep level, and they were deeply disturbed. That's what sort of prompted people to support a lot of these rules to begin with. But that was decades and decades and decades ago. We forget pretty easily.
Well, and also the early 70s and the dissolution of trust, America had been a much higher trust country in the 1960s. And this is obviously not me saying 1960s America was perfect. We can all think about huge problems with 1960s America, be it on race, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. There were lots of things going wrong, but it was easier to be a reformist, and a lot of things were getting better because there was a lot more of a commonly held faith. And the 70s kind of cracked that up. And I think, like, to some extent, American politics has been trying to figure out what to do next as trust continues to go down. So this is where I think states can really matter, in cities. Like, we need more blue places to be understood to be appealing. We need positive models of governance so you can sell people on a vision of what's the alternative? Like, what do people get out of non-corrupt government? Like, we need some good examples. I'm not saying we have none now, but I do think that it would be great to have a competition between the blue states as to which state can do better for their people. And then we can all hopefully try to make people more aware of those positive examples that we can use as a contrast with the Trump administration.
I just want to read one quick comment, and then Katya, Freddie, Lucy, I want to throw it back to you. But Randy Wynn says in the chat, this is, of course, alarming, but we are not helpless. What communities and organizations have an interest in facing the problem, such as homeowners to defend the IRA's green tax breaks, talking about we need to look for ways that we can support some of these rules and prevent corruption even at a local level. So let's how about you guys, if Lucy, Freddie, what do you have on this notion of how to rebuild trust, or the idea that just simply pointing out rule breaking isn't going to be enough?
Yeah, I'd say that, the government actually has to start, enacting its promises. Like how many decades have Democrats ran on Roe v. Wade, or Biden promised student debt relief for throughout his entire campaign, which he tried, it got blocked. But I think that people have a bit of apathy towards the government because they see a lot of promises being made and not a lot of action to get those promises enacted. So
I
any
think,
sort of pressure to get those done.
yeah, the other thing is I think that like you have to sacrifice political capital to enact actual change, which is different than messaging. And so if you want to be a party that wins, then you have to be a party that changes lives, not just a party that says they will. And so I think like really um encouraging encouraging politicians to use that political capital is obviously hard, but I think re-electing them can be really helpful in like making re-electing them, and also like electing progressive insurgents who like aren't necessarily beholden to corporate interests except for the people that they can then sacrifice their political capital to do. I also think like there are some material things that can be done, and the Revolving Door Project has done a lot of this, but one of our reporters also put together a piece on this the other day, just about like some of the most important things that Biden can do before he leaves office. And these are things that people could call their lawmakers and encourage them to do. The Senate actually still, Democrats still have the Senate until January 3rd. They could be helping to push through over 700 vacancies push through appointments for the 700 vacancies across a wide swath of agencies, or trying to push through the 78 nominees that were being considered by the Senate last week. These are all people that could basically continue to push through progressive ideals, and also just at worst try and maintain institutional integrity of agencies and parts of government, even as administrations change. Yeah, and Jeff, if you have anything to add there too.
Yeah, I think that Lucy makes great points. I think that we definitely need to see action on appointments. Both judges and independent agencies come particularly to mind. There are going to be some challenges down the way to independent agencies, but independent agencies is one of those abstract terms that only people who like follow this might know. But one that comes to mind that's particularly important to working people is the National Labor Relations Board. The term of the current chair expires in 2 weeks. She can be reconfirmed, and Democrats can maintain control of the National Labor Relations Board for 19 more months. And that's the board that protects the right of workers to organize their workplace, that organizes union elections, and is designed statutorily to be pro-worker, pro-union, even if it's not always done so. And a 3-2 majority of people who are committed to that agenda is wildly superior to a 3-2 majority in the other direction. There might be a legal fight. Trump might try to like break the entity, but like Democrats need to be willing sometimes to fight and lose. I actually think you can build political capital by taking on fights on the popular side, even if there's some possibility that you lose in the short run. I think in a cynical era, it is easier to become defined by what you're against than what you are for. If our system of politics is broken and it's hard to pass stuff, at least fight against stuff that we can all agree should be fought against. And so I'd like to see the Democratic Party become a fighting party.
We have one comment from Ruth Mary Hicks. Could we consider corruption containment 3.0? She has some steps. 1, establish that corruption exists. 2, tie them to real world downstream issues such as insurance premiums. And 3, show how much money the corrupt parties made at the expense of others. We have another comment from Robert. People in agencies are already running scared of Musk's targeting them. What gives him the right or authority to do what he is doing? What Musk and his, Doge agency or department has highlighted is just the wider effort to really purge and overhaul the career workers and employees within the federal government. But with Musk specifically, what gives him the right or authority to do what he's doing?
I mean, the threatening is essentially it's just, he has like built the algorithm of Twitter to make his voice super powerful. I think people fear what Trump might get away with in terms of breaking the rights of civil servants. I think the Supreme Court has really undercut people's confidence that even their existing legal protections will be vindicated in court. And that's terrible. I mean, it undercuts it underscores one of the things that Biden and Harris should have fought against more angrily, which is the Supreme Court and the just the Reagan Republican judiciary that we have, the Leonard Leo courts. Like, they're terrible. The Supreme Court decision giving the president immunity from anything they do in office that can be plausibly connected to their job, that's a catastrophe. And I don't think I heard requisite anger. And as a result, no one really thinks that they have, that the courts will stand up for them. I hope people stick it out, but it's obviously kind of threatening, and it's a lot easier for me to say that they should stick it out than perhaps they feel it for themselves. So I think we all have to try to stay together. We have to understand what the consequences are, and we have to communicate in our own personal networks as much as possible about why these things matter. I think that we are just not as networked together in terms of we as progressives who pay attention to politics. We are not as networked to people who don't follow politics closely. And everyone needs to figure out, be it the social media, whatever they're using on social media, or as well as their like real life old school approach, they need to talk about some of this stuff more. And people can really, they don't have to all opine on the issue of the day. We don't necessarily need millions of people playing amateur political strategist over like how the super PAC should have spent money attacking Trump. We need people talking about the issues that genuinely touch them and try to communicate their thoughts to people who might also be interested. And it can be relatively niche issues. I think like basically any issue that's important to you, you should talk about it, especially to other people for whom you think that issue will be important.
And speaking of issues, let's go around the horn real quick before we end. And Katya, Freddy, Lucy, maybe share in one sentence or less just what you are going to be looking at as a reporter in the coming weeks and months, a particular agency or particular person that you're going to be focused on that you want to, shine some light on.
Yeah, I'm continuing to be focused on the cryptocurrency industry and all of the slew of legislation that they've spent years and years stacking up in hopes to get passed. They now have a very pro-crypto Congress and a pro-crypto president. So that's what I'll be paying attention to.
And Katya.
Yeah, I'll be looking at some of the same anti-worker, anti-consumer, pro-worker, pro-consumer policies that we've been covering. How airlines and transportation are regulated and how that, affects travelers, and also looking at, especially now that the second Trump administration is coming into power, the immigration detention system, how companies are profiting from that. But I think really just going to be continuing the focus of the reporting for the last few years, and seeing how all of this develops now that Trump's coming into power.
Yes, I think me too. I am very curious to see what Lee Zeldin does with the EPA if he's confirmed. I think I am, like so many people, really concerned about the climate policy and this huge setback it may take in the next 4 years. And I think I'm also generally interested in campaign finance reform. That's been a major issue for the lever, and it's also just one that I think I have been really convinced that is it's the source of many of our issues, and it could also be the solution if we truly overhauled our campaign finance system. I think it would give us a different government in the span of just maybe a decade or two. Just because they've been so bought by corporate and special interest groups. And that sort of a trickle down effect ends up starting with representatives, and then it goes all the way through to the executive branch and the conservative federal judiciary that we have now. So I think that's an issue we'll continue to focus on.
And Jeff Hauser, same question to you. And also we had a comment from Anita in the chat. Jeff, how do we organize groups, and what can local groups do? There are groups like the Revolving Door Project.
So the issues that were mentioned are all really important ones. So the one that I will add that I think is going to be a potentially interesting political opportunity is the coming expiration of the Trump tax cuts. The big Trump tax bill from 2017 was designed to only last 8 years for congressional parliamentary procedure reasons. So that is up toward the end of 2025. Those tax cuts expire, so there's an enormous pressure on Republicans in Congress to pass them anew and perhaps add to them. And Trump's tax cuts are very unpopular. So how that plays out will be extremely interesting, because like the notion that Trump in any way moderated his views is completely antithetical to his posture on taxes, where he, continues to embrace his extremely unpopular Trump tax cuts. In terms of what people can do, I would push against the idea that there's like a single answer that all local groups or all potential local groups should follow. I think that in different parts of the country, there are different vacuums, and people should try to look at where the overlap between what is no one doing in their local area and people are particularly interested in. That can be monitoring your school board, that can be environmental causes, that can be electoral politics. It's going to vary considerably, but I think the more people build connections to other people around issues that are broader than themselves, they're building social power and social capital that can be deployed at other moments down the line. So I would just encourage people to try to do an analysis of like what exists. They can try joining the things that do exist, asking them like, why is it that you don't do something else? And then there might be a good reason. There might just be, hey, we can't do everything. And you're like, okay, that's the thing I will do, the thing that they can't get to. So I would just encourage people to like look around, and they don't need to figure out the answer in the next few weeks, but like set yourself a goal in the next 3 to 6 months. I'll have done a canvas of like all the potential local groups and figure out what it is that I want to do and what's the best way for me to do it.
All right, great. Well, that is all the time we have for this live event. To everybody watching live right now, I'm very sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions here. We are reading them all. We will save them and send them around the newsroom. It is always so helpful to know what listeners and viewers out there and fans of the lever actually think is important. And having all of you out there sharing with us that you actually do think this stuff is important is going to be just as important in the coming years, because like I said earlier, there is this sense that what we're seeing now is the norm, and some of these issues of corruption and conflicts of interest and just bad governments don't matter anymore. So thank you for attending this event, Katya, Freddy, and Lucy. Thank you. And Jeff Hauser from the Revolving Door Project, thank you for taking your time out of your day to come with us. How can people find out more about the Revolving Door Project quickly?
Sure. So we are on the web at the revolvingdoorproject.org. And we also have a Substack, just revolvingdoorproject.substack.com. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll be back.